coming tonight. It's another beautiful, what is it, a Tuesday night? Fantastic. So I'd like to welcome you all to another wonderful Associate Student Productions event. Before I introduce Gary here, I'd like to tell you about a couple of our events coming up. On November 3rd, we are having a State of the Economy address. It'll be a panel of actually economic professors, 4 of them. That will be happening at 5:30, I believe, in the Student Union MPR. So that's on November 3rd, I believe, yes. And they will be discussing the recession that we are currently possibly in. So it's pretty exciting stuff, or depressing, either way. So hope to see you guys there as well. And also we have another one of our $1 movie nights at the Rialto Cinemas. And that will be on Wednesday, November 5th. So feel free to go to the Student Union and buy tickets for that. So, but without further ado, Gary Karp, last year was actually inducted into the Spinal Cord Injury Hall of Fame as a disability speaker. So he's pretty well renowned. He is the author of 3 books and an editor of a 4th book. And one of the books that he wrote includes Disability and the Art of Kissing. So if we could, guys, give a warm round of applause for Gary Karp.
A really nice, compact introduction. Thank you all for being required to be here. Though I guess not all of you are required to be here, right? Some of you actually chose on your own to come. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Really glad to be here to talk about a subject that everybody is interested in but is uncomfortable talking about. Sexuality is something that is so innate to every single one of us. It is just about being human and so universal, but there's so much nervousness and so many boundaries and trickiness around comfort levels. And then when you add disability into the formula, that really makes some people a little uncomfortable. And so I find that when I speak about this, people are so relieved. You know, the need is so real and so authentic. Everybody wants to talk about this. Everybody wants to understand this, and especially somebody who has grown up with or has acquired a disability, or somebody who has a family member or a friend, or maybe you're attracted to somebody with a disability, or you're going to be a professional working with disability. It is such a widespread thing that touches everybody, or can touch everybody in some way. And I hope that what you'll find when we're done is that when we look at sexuality in the context of disability, we really find out a lot about just being human and what sexuality and intimacy and relationship is about just in its own right. It's not just a question of whether, can they do it? Which is the first question, of course, that typically comes to mind. So let me ask a question. How many of you would be willing to date a person with a disability? Honestly. Really honestly. Okay. Good showing of hands. And it's an interesting question because some people are jump to certain conclusions. Now, my wife gets this all the time. We've been married 5 years now. And when she meets somebody and it gets to a point where she lets them know she's married to a man who uses a wheelchair, you know what the reaction often is? Oh. It's either like, oh, like sympathetic, or like, oh, how wonderful of you, how sacrificial of you. You've done that. And she says, no, you don't understand. It has nothing whatsoever to do with the disability. Our relationship is about our relationship, and the disability is not at all why we're together. It doesn't have anything to do with that. But there's some boundary that we have to get over. Yeah, my switch is not really. Well, maybe it's because I hit the mute button. Testing. Ooh, much better, baby. Gee, I thought it was such a natural sound. Okay. We live in a society that has a lot of very deep-set beliefs about disability and about what it means. There's a lot of portrayal in the media that fosters these ideas we have about people with disabilities, that either they live a tragic life and it's really difficult, and thank God it's not us, I would never want it to be me, or they're very remarkable, heroic, inspirational, amazing, special people. Society sees disability in extremes. And if it's one extreme or the other, then what's that going to do to your notion of a person with a disability as a potential partner? Either, oh, they're tragic and I'm going to have to take care of them, and they're not going to be very good, or are they special enough? Are they one of those really incredible, rare, amazing people? And the bar gets set really high, and either they fail outright, or do they meet this exaggerated test rather than, no, we're just people, and we just happen to have certain characteristics about ourselves, we happen to function in certain ways. And there's a very, very wide range of what disability means. There are physical disabilities. I'll tell you a little bit more about my own experience in a while, but I have a spinal cord injury, and there are people with cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, amputation. You know, there's quite a long list of reasons why somebody might be using a wheelchair or have limited mobility. There are cognitive disabilities, visual and hearing impairments, and there are cognitive disabilities, people with lower IQ, people with brain injuries, people with bipolar disorder, these of course being hidden disabilities, and then a whole range of other disabilities. And it's actually a pretty immense range of things, from somebody who had a strain injury, tendinitis, diabetes, facial disfigurement, short stature. The list goes on and on and on. People with really bad taste in clothes. There are a lot of that was a test joke. Obviously didn't go over so well. I know, I kind of surprised you, slipped it in there. And so the question is, where do you define what a disability is, and what does it really mean? And in terms of sexuality, you cannot make any assumptions at all. Somebody with any kind of a disability might have varying degrees of sexual capacity in terms of actual functionality on the clinical level of things. But just because somebody is unable to walk doesn't mean that they don't have full sensation. For instance, people with cerebral palsy, that is entirely a nervous system and muscular issue. It has nothing whatsoever to do with their sensations. So rule number one is do not jump to any conclusions about what that means. You've got to find out for yourself. But what happens is you're either attracted to somebody or you aren't. And those of you who didn't raise your hand when I asked if you would date someone with a disability, you may very well have an experience one of these days where you encounter somebody and go, hey, gosh, I'm feeling attracted. And then maybe you start connecting with this person and you find out that, gosh, we have some interest in, we can communicate really well. We have shared values. I like doing the same stuff that that person does. And again, there's that chemistry thing that, I'm feeling a trick. Well, what do I do with this? Right? This is a common experience. Which is why I'm sure you've all heard or encountered people where someone with a disability is in a relationship with their therapist or their nurse or somebody that they were in a clinical setting with. And again, it plays into that assumption that, that person who's the clinical kind of person, they somehow have this special grace to be able to understand what the disability is and they can get over it. And that's the kind of person it would take. Now, it has nothing to do with that whatsoever. They simply had the opportunity to get to know each other, to make the connection as people, and that's how it happens. And it's entirely about that. The disability actually goes away. It really disappears. So we have this whole array of types of disability, and we have this divide between whether it's a childhood disability or something acquired a little later. But it raises an issue about what is sex? Anybody know? Sex, in terms of society's view, and especially when we're younger and our hormones are really running wild, sex gets equated with one particular activity, what I like to call porn star athletic intercourse. And if you can't do it like a porn star, then don't bother showing up, because that's what it is. But then what happens if you can't do it like a porn star? Which inevitably happens in everybody's life, because, as we age, we lose the ability to be quite as athletic in bed. And so maybe being athletic in bed is really not what it takes to be a good lover. Maybe being athletic is not what makes for great sex. But that's the way society, and these days especially with what's happening on the internet, I've done a little bit of research. It's the only reason I've seen it. And what you see there is a lot of, youth and a very narrow range of image, or if it's anything else, then it's alternative, right? It's, it's some voyeuristic, odd thing if you're interested in anything but the youthful, athletic, beautiful people doing it like animals. And look at what that does to our brains. What does that do about our beliefs about sexuality and about our own self-esteem and self-worth and our own capacity to be attractive and to be successful in relationship? This is a core issue that disability raises, because when you have a disability, there's no way you're going to fit that. When you have a visible disability, then that's it. And so it gives people the opportunity to have to consider a question. Okay, so I don't fit that image anymore. I don't qualify for porn star sex anymore. So does that mean that I can't feel attractive, or that I can't consider myself a viable partner for somebody, that I'm not capable of pleasing anybody? You see how the question arises when you don't fit it, and you don't have to be paralyzed. I mean, I'll bet almost everybody in this room, in some way, on some level, has struggled with this question of how you all fit that image, right? So we're all done a disservice by the way society thinks about sex. And as you explore sexuality in the context of disability, you find out that, hey, guess what? Sex is not about porn star athletic intercourse. It's one of many, many, many options. And it's not a necessity. In fact, it's not even everybody's favorite thing to do. It's pretty exhausting. So, why tire yourself out? And believe me, when you get out in the world and you have a career and you have a family, then, if you got to have enough energy for sex at the end of the day, forget about it. It's not going to happen. It's that more relaxed, easygoing style of sexuality that actually lets you still have a sex life as you move on further through your life. Okay, well, just accept this. I'm going to fly off on tangents all over the place. But that's sort of the way it'll be tonight. Relationships that are based on sex don't last. If that's really the main connection for why people are together, then ultimately it's going to run dry. Ultimately, you're going to age together, or you're going to encounter an inevitable challenge in your relationship, in your life, in your partnership together that's going to require you to actually be partners and communicate and trust each other and accept each other's weaknesses, and that being great in bed does not carry people through that. So being with somebody simply because your sexual chemistry is fantastic is the wrong reason to make a commitment to somebody. And too many people discover this the hard way in life. And so people with disabilities who are in successful relationships, it's because the whole set is there. It's because it's about the relationship. It's about the connection. And it's also about being great lovers. In one of my books, Life on Wheels, it's a comprehensive overview for wheelchair users. And there's a chapter in there called Sex, Intimacy, and Babies. And there's a great quote from a woman who was in a relationship with a paralyzed man for a while. And essentially what she said was, it's really not that big of an issue. He doesn't call a lot of attention to it. He helped me understand what I needed to understand. And actually, we're great friends, and we're wonderful lovers, and, I just try not to get in his way when he's getting in and out of the car. See? So that is really what this is about. It's about what is relationship, what is the real nature of intimacy. So let's see. When somebody has a disability from childhood, so that could be cerebral palsy, it could be very early childhood injuries, it could be muscular dystrophy, there's a whole array of them. That's just who they are. They haven't had to go through some kind of an adjustment process to their disability. It's just their identity. It's just how they've always grown up. And if they've been fortunate enough to grow up in a family that didn't treat them any different, then they don't think there's anything wrong with them. But the real common experience for people with childhood disabilities is when they hit puberty. All of a sudden, their friends that they were playmates with suddenly don't give them the same status when it suddenly becomes about boys and girls and dating. And suddenly they're not allowed, the same status. And so they have to go through a really difficult period of all of a sudden, wait a minute, how come the world sees me? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm no different than anybody else. And they tend to have two different reactions to this, I find, that they either sort of try to buy out. They say, okay, well, I'll just be asexual. They become undersexed. Or they become oversexed. They say, okay, well, I'm going to show them. I'm going to get out there, and I'm going to be more aggressive, I'm going to be more assertive, I'm going to be more sexy, and I'm going to try and compensate for this. And they really go through struggles during that time exactly because of how many people in the world will simply not consider them as a partner. And therefore miss the opportunity to find out who they are as a person for that quality of relationship and intimacy and connection to actually happen. And fortunately, most of them find their way through into adulthood, and then they have that connection that happens, and then they discover that they're really a person, and it happens. And then there's the process of acquiring a disability, of having an injury or a condition of some kind. For instance, the traumatic injuries, car crashes, falls, gunshots, all kinds of nasty stuff that happens. Or infections in the spinal cord or cancer, a whole variety of things that can happen to people. And when we have a major traumatic sudden shift in our body, in our identity, in our physical capacity, in our sexual options, we're just human beings, and we overwhelm easily, and we can't integrate something like that quickly and easily. So there's an adjustment process that has to happen when people are faced with traumatic change. And the tendency of society, again, is to think, oh gosh, how does somebody get through that? I'm always asked, how did you deal with the anger and the depression, that you must have felt, Gary, when you were injured? I was 18 years old when I was injured. That's the assumption, that it has to be a dark, horrible, terrible thing. But those of you who are psychology, sociology, and nursing, you learn psychology, right? There's a very, very wide range of the way people cope with things. There are many different styles for the way people do it. And some people do it with anger and depression and just burdened by the loss. And some people do it with a type A gung-ho, okay, I'm going to get up there and improve myself, and I'm going to earn approval, and I'm going to be positive, and I'm going to show everybody how great and special I am. And that's the way they're coping with it, too. Or some people indulge in sick humor as a way of doing it. There are lots of different ways that it happens. But whatever it is, so crucial to understand two things. That it's an initial process that the majority of people get through. That disability being equated with tragedy is a mistake. People going through depression or darkness or anger, it's because they are in a process of coping. And if they're still angry, and if they're still in kind of a dark, negative, victimized kind of place about their disability, it's not the disability. It's because they are still stuck in a coping process, that they need some counseling or some support to get through, or they got early baggage that has nothing to do with the disability whatsoever. So back to the question of whether somebody could be an intimate partner, the assumption that, because of their disability, they must be angry, they must be struggling, there's something in there that's really dark and really difficult in them, and if I get involved with this person in a relationship, then it's going to come up. That is a huge mistake, because there are so many people with disabilities who have moved through that process, and it's just integrated into who they are, and they don't see themselves in those terms. They don't identify themselves by their disability. In fact, there are people with disabilities who are very frustrated because they want to be considered partners for casual sex too. I hear this from people. They say, "Well, how come I don't get considered? I want to have a one-night stand once in a while," because people are afraid that, if I get involved once, let's see, where is it? Okay, so this is a section in Artificing called "Can I Have Casual Sex?" The question is, I've encountered some people who interested me as partners for a more casual sexual relationship, but I got the impression they just wouldn't consider me for that because of my disability. Why can't I have casual sex too? And then Dear Gary answers, My theory about what people are thinking when they reject a disabled partner for a casual encounter is that their assumption is that you're desperate for sex because, well, you have such limited options to be sexual, their thinking goes, that you will necessarily become possessive. If they agree to have sex with you, then you'll keep coming back for more since they must be one of the rare ones willing to do it. This, of course, could be true of anyone, so it's unfair of them to assume it's a feature of disability when it's really an issue of self-esteem. You have to deal with the person, not with the disability. And if you're looking at the disability and allowing that to be the primary identity of who that person is, then you're going to miss out on the opportunity to find out that this just might be the person who is going to be a great partner for you, that they're going to care about you, that they're going to understand you, that you're going to be able to communicate with them, that you're going to be able to trust each other emotionally, and that you'll be able to be great in bed together. So do not let the disability itself simply stop it. You've got to look at people as people, because the disability is really just a small part of who we are. So I went through an adjustment process. I was 18 years old when I was in 1973. Let's see, which makes me 37. Okay. Some of you can't do math, I see. I grew up outside of Detroit, a place called Southfield, Michigan. And there was a huge storm in the summer of 1973, and it just tore the whole town up and damaged a lot of trees. So a neighbor had hired some friends of mine and I to clear his property. And there was one tree in the front yard that needed to be cut down, and we said, sure, we'll do it. He should have hired professionals to do this. But we were 18-year-old kids, and we could do anything. Nothing possibly happened to us. He was offering us $500 to do it. For $500, I would have married his daughter. Much less, why not climb up a tree with a chainsaw? I had never touched one in my life, but who cares? I wanted to impress my friends. In hindsight, I know that's where my mind was. At 18, I was making some poor choices. So I climbed up in that tree, about 25 feet, and I was standing in a very, very solid position. But once I started cutting into that branch, it broke off of its own weight, and the tree literally catapulted me out. And just in a flash, I was on the ground, immediately unable to move my legs or feel the lower half of my body. I broke my vertebrae at T12 and L1. That's where the last ribs meet the spine. So I have a fairly low spinal cord injury. So I spent 6 weeks in the hospital recovering from surgery to rebuild my spine. And then I went through a very intensive 7-week rehabilitation process where they exercised me so intensely that I still have stretch marks on my shoulders because my skin couldn't keep up with how fast my muscles were expanding. I was a really skinny 18-year-old kid, and they turned me into this hunk of manhood. In order to be as independent as possible, they taught me how to live well. They optimized my independence in the context of my disability. They helped me to be as healthy as possible in the context of my disability. I got trained in how to get out and live with this, but there was no sexuality support whatsoever for me, especially at 18 years old. And at one point I asked my doctor, will I be able to have babies, I think is the question I asked him, and he did this. No. And that was it. So not only did I, take from that I wasn't going to have babies, but I took from that I will never enjoy sex, that no one will ever commit to me, that I won't be able to please a partner. There was this immense flood of stuff that he unleashed in me that I had to go out and work through myself to find out, because internally I still felt very sensual. I still felt very sexual, and I was not willing to not have a sex life. And I had this stuff planted in my brain that turned out not to be true whatsoever. So I was done a disservice. So any of you that are going to be working in any kind of a clinical relationship with somebody who's dealing with a traumatic change, you absolutely have got to get this straight. You can convey to somebody by word or by, non-verbally, and give them that sense that, oh yeah, you're as screwed as you think you are. And I don't mean literally. Because people are very, very sensitive to that. Because in the beginning, after traumatic change, that's exactly what we're afraid of. We're afraid that we're going to be burdened and that we're not going to be able to live our lives fully and have all of those experiences that all of us want in our lifetimes. So I was 18. This is a pretty intense time to have a change happen in your sexuality. I was injured at T12L1, and that's right in the part of the spinal cord where sexual response actually happens. Sexual response, to give you the quick clinical physiological lecture here, is not a matter of the brain connecting to the genitals. It's about the brain connecting to that part of the spinal cord and the genitals connecting to that part of the spinal cord. So if somebody has an impact to the spinal cord above that level, so people who are quadriplegic, high-level paraplegics, because the higher up the spinal cord injury is, the more of the body is affected. Do you guys understand this? Okay. Christopher Reeve had a very high cervical level injury. That's why he had no use of his body at all. I have a very low spinal cord injury, so I still got my hips and everything up above. Right? I'm not paralyzed from the waist down. I'm paralyzed from the thighs down because it's a low injury. Okay. So if you're injured above that level, then people have what's called reflexogenic response. There is no interruption from the genitals to that part of the spinal cord. And if it's below that level, then you have what's called psychogenic response. Yes, the brain is a sexual organ, and people become aroused through thought and through connection and love and feeling and tragedies and beauty. But my injury is like right in the middle there, but I also have an incomplete spinal cord injury. So there was no way for the doctor or anybody to know what my body was really capable of, because there are some of those axons that are still kind of communicating through there. So lesson number one is tell people to go out and find out for themselves. That's part of the fun, discovering your own body, finding out what works and what doesn't, what feels good and what doesn't. So again, I was 18 when I was injured, and I do have a loss of sensation. I did have a loss of some functionality and capacity, and at 18 years old, that's a very intense thing to go through, especially because I was still a virgin when I was injured. I was really looking forward to that first time. In fact, I'd been rehearsing for years. And I was ready. Come on, bring it on. So, I have had a really powerful experience of having to, first of all, accept the fact that in my lifetime, I'm not ever going to truly feel that particular thing that I was looking forward to so much. But at the same time, I have had so much wonderful, loving, sensual, I don't want to get too carried away with grandiose terminology, but very authentically real, wonderful, sensual experience and loving experience in my lifetime. So it almost doesn't matter. In the beginning, this kind of thing, that grief, that adjustment process is kind of large. But we as human beings have a capacity to integrate things, to adjust and move through things, to adapt to these kinds of emotional traumas where they come down into proportion with our overall emotional life. Because we start to discover what's possible, for one thing. We start to find out, gosh, there is life, there is sensuality, there is love, there is connection, there is relationship, there is intimacy. And so the fact that I can't feel or do this one or two particular things, it starts to become a lot smaller in scale compared to the rest of it, which is so much more important and so much more authentic and meaningful in your life when you give yourself the chance to find that out. And so it might seem like that heroic thing, it takes a special person to do that, but it really doesn't. It is a very common thing. We are wired as human beings to do this. So the more you can think of yourselves and people as really having this ability, it's just built into you, rather than you have to be one of those rare heroic people because, oh wow, look how Gary has found a way to make peace with this. Well, I still have feelings about it. Of course I have feelings about it. For the rest of my life, I will wish that I could truly feel that 18-year-old sexual moment that I didn't get to have, of course. But does it overwhelm me emotionally? No, because I would much rather put my attention on what's possible. I would much rather have an emotional life that I feel good about and that I enjoy, rather than dwelling on the stuff that I've lost. But at the same time, I have feelings about it sometimes. And this is an ultimate test of quality relationship. if I'm with somebody and I hit that little corner in myself of that loss and I feel the grief that I carry about that, and I actually feel sad, and I actually allow that sadness to come up, I actually allow myself to cry, a natural human physiological reaction to an authentic emotion, and I'm with a partner who has feelings for me and then accepts me and allows me to have my emotions out, and then my partner has an emotion, and then I do the same thing for them because she has a feeling about my loss, about her loss, and we share that feeling together. You know what that does? That makes a deep, intimate bond that strengthens our relationship. We hold each other, we cry together, we talk about what we experience, and then we move through it and we get on with, okay, what's next? Where were we? Or what are we going to do now? You do not be overwhelmed by it. To be able to have your emotions and trust your partner and be vulnerable is one of the greatest accomplishments of any relationship, and it's a hard thing to do for any of us, even in the longest lasting relationships. This is lifelong work, and it's not exclusive to disability. Everybody in their relationships, everybody in their lives has loss, has frustrations, has things that feelings can come up about. And again, disability seems like, oh, that's a really big one, but it's the same. It's the same as everything else. So you see, this has so little to do with disability when it really comes down to it. It really is about just the nature of relationship and intimacy and whether you're with the right partner. You know, disability is kind of a filter. You find out pretty quickly whether or not somebody is going to be accepting of who you truly are when you have a disability. So it's one of the advantages of disability. We don't spend as much time in false starts. We don't waste as much time in relationships where we're totally lost in all the sex. And because we have to communicate. We have to really know each other. And you find out really quickly whether somebody's right for you or not. And really, a lot of people with disabilities consider this an advantage. So I was worried that not only was I not going to have an enjoyable sex life, but that no one would ever commit to me as a life partner. So it was a much larger thing. It was about my entire future and the kinds of decisions that I was going to make about family and about what was going to be possible for me. And so it was very, very scary in the beginning because I had this doctor's idea in my brain. But I knew that I was a great kisser, and I was still a great kisser. I had a chance to find that out pretty early. But revealing my body, that was a scary thing. Because I haven't used my legs in 35 years, and so my muscles are much thinner. And in the early years, and still to some degree, actually, I'm a little self-conscious about my kind of skinny legs. So we adapt. This is just my new normal now. It's just the way my body is. You know, normal legs actually look kind of freakishly large to me. It's very strange. We adapt. It's just who I am. But again, in that adjustment process that I went through in the beginning, and this is what anybody will go through, that first time when you're going to reveal something about your body that maybe is different in some way. Whether it's a limb amputation or skinny atrophy limbs or scars, or people have a variety of reasons why they might be a little afraid to reveal their body. And isn't this another one that everybody is afraid of? The first time you're with somebody, revealing your body, isn't that a huge moment for everybody? Okay, so it's got another little edge to it with disability. And what a relief to find out that it didn't matter. Once I was with, especially that first partner, my first girlfriend, Shoshana, it so didn't matter. And it was so clear, so fast that it didn't matter. Because our connection was so strong, because our sensuality was so strong, because of wanting to please each other and how much we enjoyed being together. It was all so strong that it just completely overrode all that stuff. So I've been really blessed in so many ways to have been with some partners, to be able to learn these things and find out that this is true. Now, I was also pretty scared about, okay, so if I can't do that, though I didn't really know whether I could or not, or how long, or how it felt, or, it was all a big mystery in the beginning. And we got to find out together, and she was totally in with that. So good, let's find out. But the standard recommendation for people who maybe intercourse is not their number one top of the list anymore. It's like, so you'll engage in oral sex. Well, at 18, no, I didn't think so. That just didn't, no, it just didn't appeal to me. But fortunately, I developed a taste for it. And thank God for that. And I found out that for some partners, that they actually like that better than intercourse, right? That I didn't have to be able to do that porn star thing as the only way I could please somebody. In fact, I could do things that actually pleased my partner more than that. Whew, wow, what a relief. And what happens is, because of our disability, because we've lost whatever we've lost, the natural human response to that, ultimately, is, okay, well, exactly because I've lost what I lost, then I insist on my entitlement to whatever remains. You start to realize that, okay, well, because I've lost this, if these things are possible for me, and I don't explore them, then I have multiplied my loss. So in terms of sensuality, okay, well, I can't feel this, or I can't feel that. Okay, let's find every nerve ending on my body. Let's every possible way to stimulate that. Let's find out what I can do for other people and what really gets them off and what I enjoy and the things that I can feel good about because I am pleasing the person that I'm attracted to, the person that I love. And there's sort of an amplified commitment to that, to get out there and, okay, let's find everything. And you discover, parts of your body I think that a lot of people never discover. You discover levels of sensuality that a lot of people never get to. There's really a disadvantage at being overly committed to only the really big, earth-shaking, huge, orgasmic sexual experience. The subtle stuff is just as powerful if you allow your mind to relax and if you allow your attention to focus on the real gentle, the real slow stuff. There is immensely wonderful feeling in there, and I'm certain that lots and lots of people in the world never, ever get there. So, I have an assignment for you. Next chance you get, or two assignments actually. First of all, be with your partner without gentle sex. Try that. Find out everything else you can. And one of the favorite spots that I want to point you to is this spot inside the elbow. Now, I don't know how many of you have tried this, but again, the next chance you get, I want you to have your partner put their tongue in there. Nice and silky, wet and warm and very sensual, okay? And, well, you've got my business cards with my email address. I want to hear from you about how it went. Collecting stories for another book I'm going to call Inside the Elbow. Somebody actually took me up on that once, believe it or not. I know that none of you. No, I insist that you all do. You'll get credit for it in class, right? So the top 10 list just changes. Okay, so maybe I don't feel intercourse as much as somebody else might have. Maybe that sort of goes lower down on the list. Maybe other things. Maybe my inside the elbow is my number one now. You just reprioritize. It's this willingness to redefine that this is about. It's that willingness to reprioritize. And it's the people who are holding on to, this is what I was supposed to be. Or I need to fit this cultural image of what sexuality is, of what performance is. And that's what I have to try to do. They call it passive. To try to deny the disability as much as absolutely possible and think of the pressure that that puts on somebody. Trying to not be who you are. Inevitably, that creates a lot of pressure. Inevitably, that compromises your self-esteem. Inevitably, that compromises your ability to be a great lover, because if you're in there trying to be something other than who you are, then how can you possibly be available for a true intimate relationship? It just doesn't work. So this quality of self-acceptance is what it's all about for everybody. And accepting your body and allowing that reprioritization to happen is really the trick to this. So I move through the initial process. People have to explore their body. If they they have a partner, then the partner joins in that exploration to find out, okay, what is our sexuality now? What works, what doesn't? Let's find new things. Let's be creative. Let's explore. Let's maybe try some things we've never tried before. And then you get to know your body. And then it is crucial to have the talk. Now, I made a big mistake once in my 20s because I was living downtown Detroit and I made a connection with this really beautiful sort of Polynesian woman. She was just really sweet, and we were cuddling and touching and kissing, and things were really happening. And it finally got to the point, a couple of weeks in, where we had the chance to be together. And I just wanted to go for it. I was 20, what was I, 25 or something. And I didn't want to have to say, excuse me, just a moment, let me tell you all about reflexogenic response. No, I just wanted to go for it. And what a mistake, because we did, and we got to a point where she had an expectation that I was not going to live up to, where something wasn't going to happen that she expected. And I didn't have the maturity or the ability to just step back and realize what had happened, to say, let's rewind the tape a little bit here. Tape, you guys know what tape is? That's a metaphor that's not going to work one of these days. and have that conversation of, I really should have explained. So the talk, I learned the lesson. You have to have the talk up front. So somebody with a disability who meets a new partner and is going to enter into an intimate relationship, and you get to that point, like, clearly we like each other and we want to please each other, and this is what we're ready for now. Okay, you have the conversation. And it's so beneficial to have the conversation. It's another thing that everybody should do in any new relationship. Let me tell you about my body. Let me tell you what I like. Tell me what you like. And most of all, if you have any questions that you want to ask me, go ahead. I am not afraid to talk about my body, my preferences, my feelings. Communication from the get-go. That makes for solid relationship. And it makes for finding out who you're with and whether there's somebody that you're going to be able to really trust and open yourself up to. And with disability, it's really, really, really critical that somebody knows that, okay, I'm not capable of this position, or I'm not going to feel this when you touch me here because, my nerves just don't make it through that part of my spinal cord to my brain anymore. And so be it. But let me tell you about inside my elbow. There's even the notion that when your body loses some degree of capacity, that it actually transfers to other parts of your body. And this is another very common thing. Some people find that their nipples, their shoulders, their neck, their ears, their back, various parts of their body become extra, even more sensitive. Massage therapists have told me that my upper body is actually a little more responsive and more ultra-sensitive than some other people. So there's something about this sort of transference and balance that happens. Okay? So the talk. I have a piece in the book about that too that I wanted to read you. What a growth experience that was. I so wish I had the talk because she was really sweet. D2, and the whole thing just came crashing, and we did not get through that. That's really the point of my story, that it just ended the whole thing. We were utterly stopped in our tracks by that. And having the talk also is an opportunity to either show your partner that you have confidence, that you know yourself, and helps them relax, or to be able to say, and this is harder, I know this is harder, to be able to say, I'm afraid. I never revealed my body to somebody since my disability. I don't quite know my body or what works, and gosh, I like you, and gosh, you're beautiful, and it's scary for me to trust you, but this is where I'm at, and can you go there with me? Can we go there together this way? And what a test if somebody says, yeah, you bet, you can trust me. I really care about you. Let's find out what works. Let's go with your fear and all these unknowns, and let's go there and find out. Because the feelings are real enough that you can trust that you're going to find some good stuff. So ultimately, it gets you to a place of self-confidence. I asked a friend of mine, a female friend of mine once, what is the most attractive thing to you in a man? And her answer was self-confidence. It didn't have anything to do with his butt or his eyes or anything like that. It was self-confidence. And that's what this comes down to. Self-confidence is the most attractive thing there is. And the talk is your chance to demonstrate that. And if you're not feeling really confident, then honesty is the next most attractive thing. Maybe it means saying something like, I'm nervous because this is new for me, but I really like you and think you're beautiful and want to learn how I can please you, so let's explore together and find out how my body works making love. I know I'm repeating myself, but that's what it is. That's what we're attracted to. Confidence, trust, openness, honesty. And you know what? That makes for great sex. It does. Physical sex that's casual, sure, it's fun, but it doesn't last very long. It runs out of steam really quickly. A lifetime of good sex with somebody requires all of these other things, and we are all capable of it, and it's what we're wired to be, and it's the way it's supposed to work. Okay. Does anybody have any questions along the way? I would absolutely welcome, because I want to be sure that I'm addressing anything that you would like me to be talking about. Or I can just keep rambling on for another half hour or two. We're going till 9 o'clock now? Okay.
I have a question.
Please.
I've always wondered, being paralyzed and not being able to use your legs, I imagine that would entail a tremendous amount of extra work, just, getting places, getting dressed, getting in and out of buildings, in and out of cars, and you say you're just like anybody else, but I would imagine that it's just a tremendous, going to the bathroom, and that it's just so much extra work, and I would imagine there could be resentment and overwhelm associated just with all the extra work involved in that. So I'm curious how that is for you.
Several really excellent points that you raised. Yes, there's extra work, but it's not as hard as you think. When I went through rehab, I was taught certain strategies and skills in order to manage my body. And pushing the wheelchair is not as hard for me as it would be for any of you, because again, they made me strong. But also, this wheelchair is a very sophisticated device, and it is engineered and customized, built specifically to my body size, to my particular capacity. And if it was exhausting for me to use a manual wheelchair for my mobility, then I would be using a power wheelchair instead, rather than draining myself off. So much of this is about people becoming experts. It's how they live with their disability, and managing our energy is a part of it, so that we don't unduly fatigue ourselves in the course of just living our daily lives. And there's a lot of methodology and technique to that. It just becomes kind of the way we function. So not as draining as you would think. Okay. Another point you raised, though, is about the partner having feelings about what the person with a disability can't do. And this is another thing that is more of a universal relationship issue than it is a disability issue. Yes, every partner in my life has dealt with issues of, oh, Gary can't get up those stairs, or we can't sit in this part of the theater, or we can't go on the beach together, or, whatever. And then I have feelings about, oh, my partner doesn't like jazz, or, my partner doesn't have the same social style that I have and can't just jump into any crowd of people and start, interacting and meeting people and finding out about it. So, again, the disability is overemphasized, and it is a core universal relationship issue, not a disability issue of how any two people partner with each other and accept whatever the limitations are that each person brings to the relationship. Okay. So did that answer the question, or was there another component to it? So it's back to that same issue, relationship skill issue. Yes?
How would you suggest that the best way to be supportive to a partner who has low self-esteem, especially sexually, regarding their disability, other than obvious, being like, well, you're still sexing me, that kind of thing. What are some good ways to be supportive of someone without a disability?
The question is, what are some of the best ways to be supportive of somebody with a disability who's in a partner, you're in a relationship, one is in a relationship with this person, that's the context, and the best way to support them in the process of finding their self-esteem. So number one is separate the disability from the self-esteem issue. This was an epiphany for me in my process of adjusting to my disability, was to not scapegoat my disability, that anything that I was unhappy about was always the fault of my disability. And then I realized, okay, so I'm struggling as, late teen, early 20s with dating, and attractiveness, and so on. And there was, that was going on before my injury. Maybe it isn't just being paralyzed that is all about. So you have to separate it out. Because I think that the more it is addressed in terms of the disability, that actually doesn't work. That actually amplifies the very thing that they're afraid of. You're so busy talking about the disability and you're missing the core issue, which is just about the person. Because it is a fact that there are people with disabilities of all kinds and all degrees and all kinds of people, men and women, young and old, heterosexual, homosexual, everything across the board, who feel good about themselves and have great sex lives. So that's the proof. The disability itself is not the determining factor. So it's just the person. And how do we discover our self-esteem in our lives? And we need experiences of success in order to find out what our inner riches are. We need to take chances and get the chance to find out that somebody understands me and accepts me for who I am, and I can get over my various delusions, in my psyche, which is what we're all doing over our whole lifetime. And to face those core questions of what is my value? What am I assuming I have to be in order to be valuable in the world? Core question, isn't it? Being able to walk has nothing to do with that. I do not have to walk to be valuable in the world. I have to be compassionate. I have to be, open to people and accepting everybody for who they are. I have to draw some boundaries in terms of values, in terms of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. I have to find my own beliefs in the world about what I think is right and what I think is wrong. And that's what it's about. And so that's the thing to focus on with that person. And I think that the more, we try and reassure somebody, then that makes it worse too. And this is the biggest part of the answer, is that what we all need more than anything else is to be met where we are, is to be acknowledged for who we are, what we think, and what we feel. And in a clinical professional relationship, this is the trick, that if somebody is in that dark, nobody's ever going to love me, I'm not worth anything anymore, and all this kind of stuff. Well, to acknowledge that is not to condone it. It's a different thing. To say, it totally makes sense that you would be thinking and feeling the things that you are. Tell me. Let it all out. I want to hear it. And I'm not going to try and make you be different than who you are. I'm not going to try and say, you shouldn't feel that. You shouldn't be in that place. Right? That will absolutely sever the relationship right there. Why would we trust anybody who's not letting us be who we are? You with me on this? Okay. But that doesn't mean, and you're right. Your life is trashed. That's not what you're saying by acknowledging and accepting. What you're saying is, I get why you're thinking and feeling what you are, but you know what? Maybe this can move. Maybe there's a path to something else from this point. Let's see where it can go. And especially as clinical professionals, I speak to a lot of physical and occupational therapy students around the country. And this is really the thing that I preach to them more than anything else, because they're professionally trained and they have learned how people do this and how this works. Those therapists that I worked with when I was in rehabilitation, they knew what I could do. They had the vision that I could not possibly form yet in the beginning of my injury. And so their job was to meet me where I was and to let me know that there are some possibilities out there I just can't picture yet, to show me that it is really far more the rule than the exception, that people surprise themselves, and so maybe I will too, and wouldn't you rather make the effort to find out where you can go than give up? Because if you don't move at all, you get nowhere. But for anybody to be of support, of value, especially of loving, intimate value in somebody's life, you've got to be with them where they are, and then hopefully move together on a path. But that person has to make that choice, right? It's not all up to you. It's up to them. Ultimately, we all have self-responsibility for our growth and development in our lives and being willing to face the stuff that's in us to get beyond something like the self-esteem change. Okay?
Like you in terms of me looking at you as an integrated sexual person, where that was in you in the continuum of your experience across your life, or whether what kind of movement we still need to do in terms of saying that PT does this or PT does this, but if you want to talk about your sexual psyche being, go see a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
Where are we in bridging that?
Well, in 73 it was just nothing.
I know.
Though there was this one blonde physical therapist that, precocious 18-year-old kid that I was, whenever I got the chance, I used to pinch her on the butt. And we made kind of a game of it, and they would scold me, but I think they considered it a good sign that I was doing that, because she never got angry at me or smacked me. But one time, they had me, walking with braces and crutches. This was a standard part of physical therapy. Back in those days when they made you walk with braces. Okay. All right. That didn't work very well, so I won't do it anymore. So we're walking around the gym, my braces and crutches, and my physical therapist's got a belt around me or something, and I say, could you just hold on to me for a second? I didn't want to be able to let go of the crutches because we were right next to the blonde, and I reached over and pinched her butt, and they set me down on the floor. So, they drew a line for me. So that was but it was a coping thing. But the point that you raised, and in case everybody didn't hear the question, it was working in this medical mode in rehab where there's the occupational therapist, there's the physical therapist, there's a social worker, and who is the one that is supposed to have the conversation with you about sexuality? And the answer is there is no one particular person who's supposed to have that conversation with you. The answer is that the person is going to ask the question of whoever they feel most comfortable with. And it could be anybody. So whether it's an OT or a PT or a rec therapist or a rehab nurse or an aide, it could be anyone that they encounter in the course of that medical experience. And so it is crucial for everybody not to be an expert and have all the answers, but to at least be clear that I know that there is a life out there for you, including sensuality. To not even unintentionally give that message, because if you're nervous and it's like, oh, I don't know, they're going to read it as, oh, it is bad. Rather than, oh, I'm not the expert, I don't have the information, but I know that there's more possible out there than you just know yet. And so go to sexualhealth.com, for instance, a website that has lots of great disability and sexuality information. Buy Gary Karp's books, you can surf the web and find a lot of stuff. Or, this is the person on the staff who has the clinical knowledge and psychological knowledge, or whatever. You just know where to point them. But the most important thing is to give that immediate response of, it's out there for you. It's just a matter of finding your particular way in your particular body. Okay? More questions? Okay, so I can talk more about intercourse. Is that okay? Intercourse really remains an option for almost everybody. Now, in 1973, and I'll tell you a little bit more, is that I am capable of erection, but what does it for me is when I'm feeling those subtle, gentle, sensual things. It's when I have to start being really physical that exertion actually overrides the thing that worked for me. So this is what I've learned about my body. It's the gentle stuff, and we want to work with it that way. And also, if I can't see it and I don't quite know if it's there or not, then it's very hard in my mind to not wonder what's happening. And so, for a fair amount of time, we just enjoyed it when we could, and it was just an accepted thing. Okay. We made the most of it while we could, until the pharmaceuticals came along. Thank you, Pfizer. Oh, wow. These drugs are very, very useful. Viagra, Levitra, Cialis. Before that, it was actually an injectable drug. So you actually injected a drug into penis. And that's a time when it's actually pretty great not to have sensation. but sometimes it's really an advantage, you know. So now think about this. There's an advantage here because, hey, it's reliable. I don't have to worry about it anymore. All right, pharmaceuticals, yeah, baby, we got plenty of time too. We got all the time you want, all the positions you want to try, no problem, let's just go for it. Men last longer with disabilities who are using the drug, you know. And if we are not ejaculatory, some are not, then wow, lots and lots of time, and our partners can actually enjoy themselves even longer. So there's an advantage to it. But then there's a funny disadvantage to it, because we want to know that we're actually arousing our partner. And if they're aroused because of a drug, then suddenly, am I turning you on, or is it just the drug? So now, see, the emotional level is always at play in sexuality. And it's very, very interesting how important it is to some partners to know that they're actually the source of the erection, not a drug. Which just means that you learn that you have to make certain that you are showing your partner that you are attracting them and that you love them, and you know, so that's not the only thing, the only cue that they're relying on for whether you want to be with them. And some very interesting things just naturally arise in the course of whatever the context of your sexuality is. It's about paying attention to them, thinking about them, being able to communicate about what people are thinking and feeling. Right? So some men are unable to take these drugs because it can foster something called autonomic dysreflexia. Particularly men who have higher spinal cord injuries, they are prone when they are stimulated in a certain way, or they might have an infection, or their bladder might be full. There are a number of reasons why this could happen for them, where their blood pressure can very, very dramatically go up. It's very, very dangerous. And so some of them can't use these drugs because unfortunately, it elevates their blood pressure. But the vast majority of people really are able to still have intercourse. All right, so the next issue is, so if you don't have as much sensation, you're not really feeling it, then what's the point? Well, being able to do it is still a remarkable thing. Even if you can't fully feel it, to be with somebody in that way, where your bodies are together in that way, where you are connected in that way, and where your partner is having the sensations and the enjoyment of that connection being with you, and maybe you don't feel it on or in around your genitals as much, but maybe you have sensation in other parts of your body and you're still feeling it in a particular way, and just the fact of being able to do it is still very, very meaningful. Or getting into certain positions where you can see what's going on, and visually it's very stimulating. So I want you to get my general principle here. It's not just about a particular sensation or a particular so-called orgasmic result. It's about many, many, many other qualities that are part of the overall experience that are still really gratifying and meaningful for people to be able to share with each other. So what? May not feel it, but it's still on the list. It may not be number one on my list. Maybe it's down at number 3 or number 4 or whatever it is. But really, for most people, it really is still in there. And again, especially thanks to support of pharmaceuticals. And for some women, it's an issue of lubrication, but any menopausal woman will point you to a variety of off-the-shelf products that help with lubrication. So that's easily enough solved. Another thing that comes up for some women is if they don't have tone in their vaginal muscles. Again, it's one little thing. It's over-exaggerated. If you can't somehow contract against, your partner during intercourse, that, oh, no, I'm not pleasing my partner. But again, it's about these much larger other things that are about. And I've met plenty of women who said that, it lasts longer. There's less friction, so they can actually, enjoy each other and be together in that way for a longer period of time. You have to really objectively be with the reality of what these things really mean and how it really happens in the dynamic of relationships. Is this making sense to everybody? Yeah? Okay. There really are some advantages. As a paralyzed man, I'm not in quite as much of a rush for intercourse. Now, I've done an anecdotal, informal study of able-bodied women, and the men in the room, in present company accepted here, but women tell me that men are in kind of a rush to get to that moment, that insertion is really the thing that they care about, And they'll indulge in, foreplay for a little while, but let's get to it already. Come on, that's what men want, right? Come on, women. Am I right? Of course I'm right. And then, when it's over, and it's all done, and you're left unsatisfied. This is a common dynamic that happens with men and women. Well, men with disabilities, we like the foreplay. We need the sensual, gradual. We're kind of in the same kind of curve as women, as what they want. So I'm planning on starting an organization where we're going to provide training classes to men without disabilities to help them become better lovers. I'm calling it the Dead Penis Society. Though, as I'm very proud to report, my wife says, it's not dead. There's some truth in this, isn't there? So, a new partner. Someone with a disability finds a new partner. And I've talked about the talk. But then another thing that often comes up, first of all, there's some grieving that the new partner finds himself feeling for the disability. Now, I was really resistant to this happening in the beginning. It was so important for me that I not be pitied. It was so important to me that people didn't feel bad for me because of my disability. And so if anybody ever had that, oh, I'm so sorry for you kind of feeling, then I really was not comfortable with that. That was very not okay for me. So, no, really, I'm all right. I went through rehab. I've got stretch marks on my shoulders. I'm a great kisser. I'm going to school. Come on, let's have sex. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. If they actually care about me, if I'm with somebody who actually loves me, then it is entirely natural that they should have those feelings for me, that they should care about the fact that I did have a loss, and I need to allow them to have that grief. So allowing people who love us to have feelings for us and about things in our life that we have loss for, another core universal relationship skill. Right? And then when we start to explore intimacy and being sexual together, another common thing that happens is the able-bodied partner feels guilty because, well, I can feel more than you can. I have bigger orgasms than you have, and I don't want to make you feel bad, so I'm going to hold back because I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want to be selfish because I can feel these big things and you can't, which is completely the wrong thing to do. Because from the perspective of the person with the disability, they want to know that they can please their partner. So if you hold back, you're actually robbing me of something that I really care about. Go for it. Let me get you off. I want to know that this works. I want you to enjoy yourself. And I'm going to ride the wave. I'm going to go along for the ride. If you can have a bigger orgasm than I can, then I get to have kind of a, what's the word for it? Come on, somebody. Vicarious, thank you, Bruce. Man. I'm going to ride the wave. I'm going to have a vicarious experience and it actually will take me a little higher than maybe I can get within my own body. So, very common dynamic. It's not about intensity of sensation. It's about equal pleasure. So to have your biggest possible sexual response and orgasm is not something that makes your partner feel bad. To be a hog and get more of the pleasure, that is the problem. So it's about learning what the partner with a disability, what their top 10 list is, and making sure that they get their equal time and their equal pleasure. And that's what counts most. Something else. You also want to be sure that you have fun in that, and that you set the tone. That you light the candles, and you get the clean sheets, and that you take care of yourself, and that you put on the music, and that you whisper sweet nothings in each other's ears. Sex is sex. Romance is romance, and that still is what it has to be about. But you also want to have, fun, in bed. And so I pull out the juggling balls. Yeah, I know, it's a lame excuse for being able to do some juggling and show off for you. But I actually have pulled the juggling balls out of bed, believe it or not. But juggling is something that I never believed I would be able to do. Living well with a disability is something that I never believed I would be capable of doing. And there was a time, it's okay, I've got one. There was a time when I feared that having a sex life and having a full, whole life was not going to be an option for me. And it turned out not to be true. And I found myself doing stuff that I used to think was completely impossible. Okay, this is the really hard one you're supposed to be clapping for. Oh, thank you. Okay, the big grand finale. No? Oh, oh. There's a thing with juggling that's just like with sexuality. It's like, how big are you, or how many can you do? How many balls have you got, Gary? So a little insight into the world of juggling. There are people who are into quantity, they call it numbers, but you know what? Did you notice all the different variety patterns and all the cool stuff that I was just doing? You can do a lot more with 3 than you can with 6. But I did have to at least learn 4, so I'll show you that. Okay, now you... Look how seamlessly you work the juggling into the sexuality. Anybody else have questions?
Do you miss your legs?
No, they're right here.
No,
I know what you mean. I'm sorry. Do I miss my legs? No. I actually... I don't think so, because I don't think about it. I don't really think about wanting to walk any more than you think about wanting to be able to fly. It is simply not an option. It's just not. And so it just makes no sense for me to think about that. The reality of it is that absolute. And people we're not that masochistic. People just do not spend their lifetime dwelling on that. And again, like I said earlier, if they are, then they need counseling, or they've got some other victim mentality or something else that's going on. The vast majority of us reach a point of like, well, okay, I want my life, and I don't want to suffer, and so I'm going to adapt. And we are innately adaptive creatures. It is amazing to discover how true this is, that I adapted just because I'm built for it. Because my skinny legs look normal to me now. That's something about my brain and something about my psychology, something about the way we are all built as human beings, that we adapt to this kind of stuff if we allow ourselves to, right? So, no. Would I like to walk? Well, yeah, sure. If you could snap your fingers and I could be walking again, yeah, that would be just great. Can you do that? No. Okay. Didn't think so. So, oh well, move on. Have my occasional feelings of frustration, have my moments where I touch something that's in there, I think, pretty deep, that maybe I'm holding at bay because denial is part of the way that I live my life. It has its uses, gets in the way sometimes, but it has its purpose. Because really, I would really rather put my attention there. And I want to emphasize this again. It might seem like a really heroic, amazing, wow, Gary, what an inspirational kind of thing, but it is far more normal than you would think. It is far more normal than society and the general cultural view of disability would have us think. It really, really is. I've been involved with the disability community in a very in-depth way. So I've met a lot of people who have every kind of disability under the sun. And I'm just convinced so thoroughly from my own experience of how human it is that everybody does this capacity that we all have to adapt. Because I've just met so many people who have done it, and they're no more heroic than you are. They're no more special than anybody in this room. They just did what everybody does. If they got the support and the resources, if they got access to rehab, if they got the right wheelchair, if they got the technology. This is what it's about. It's a political issue. It's a policy issue. People with disabilities in the world today are emerging. And they're getting out there and doing more than people with disabilities have ever done before in history. And I'm not overemphasizing this. This is absolutely true. And society is still operating on a lot of very, very old beliefs, though, about this. We're still applying old models to disability and that idea that, oh, it's only the heroic special ones who are doing it. But no, the ones who are doing it are the ones who got what they needed to be able to do it. And there are still way too many people out there who are not getting access to the kind of rehabilitation and resources and even medical support and, to be able to get out and live well and then therefore be available to be intimate partners with people in the world. There are people who are still forced into institutions simply by a matter of Medicaid policy. They can't have an intimate life when they're forced into an institution, when they could live in the community with community-based services that cost way less than having them in an institution. I'm getting on my little political soapbox here. But you see, there is a connection to the intimacy issues. If they can't be out in the world, how can they be available for intimate relationships? Because you better believe in those institutional settings, they don't really allow them to have sex. It's pretty hard for them to be able to have intimate relationships inside of an institution where it's about you get up this time, you go to bed this time, you eat your meals this time, you're allowed access to this. It's all controlled. So it really does have to do with everybody's innate right to seek love and intimacy and have a whole life. What got me started on that one? So this is still a transition that's happening in the world, is that we need to change the very core cultural view of disability to bring it up to speed with truth, that these are not damaged goods, that when we invest in providing people with the resources they need, because now we've removed a lot of the physical obstacles, right? 1973, when I was injured, the blue parking spots were just beginning to happen. I had times where I had to give my car keys to people to back a car out of the spot because there wasn't room left. Somebody had parked too close to me. I got carried in back doors and up steps a lot in the 70s because removing all of the artificial obstacles was just beginning to happen. I have degrees in architecture, and that's what I studied in school. And I went to an architectural school that was inaccessible. Half story up, half story down. I was carried in and out of school for 5 years. It was the only way that I could do it. So, it was just kind of routine, and everybody sort of knew the drill, and it's just the way it had to work. So that was an artificial obstacle, right? I'm not disabled by my paralysis. I'm disabled by steps. So this is what's happening. The artificial obstacles are being removed. The possibilities are expanding. Technologies are empowering people. People with disabilities are healthier than they ever have before. We have an adaptive physical education program here at Sonoma State. I have a hand cycle, the Paralympic Games. Has anybody ever heard of the Paralympic Games? Yeah? And how would you distinguish the Paralympic Games from the Special Olympics? Can anybody make that distinction for me? Elaine?
Special Olympics is for people with intellectual disabilities. They can also have physical disabilities. Paralympics is for people with physical disabilities.
Okay, so the Special Olympics is for people with intellectual disabilities. Paralympics is for the full array of types of disabilities. Is there any other distinction that you might make or anybody might make? Okay, here's the distinction I'm going to make. The Special Olympics is a motivational event. Absolutely valuable, valid, but its primary purpose is to be motivational. Whereas the Paralympics is the Olympics for people with disabilities. World-class athletes who make full commitments, serious commitments, to their event. And they're out there to compete. They're not out there to be, rewarded for their disabilities. I know there's a little overlap. People in Special Olympics do make serious commitment to it, I understand that. But there's a real important distinction in the cultural view, right? And here's another thing, Are you going to think that an athlete is sexy if they're competing for a medal and they have a disability, or are you going to think they're sexy if they're one of the top athletes on earth in their event, and that they are disciplined and devoted and hardworking and motivated the way any world-class athlete is. Isn't that sexy? Yes, everybody said. Okay. I know, sometimes I'm not just being rhetorical. So is that a fair comparison, in your view?
The distinction, you mean?
Yeah, the distinction.
I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I'm sure I would agree with it totally.
Okay, well good. We need to have more of a conversation about that.
Well, just because I think that for some athletes with physical disabilities, for example, there are organizations that have sport for people with physical disabilities that are very motivationally oriented too, that aren't associated with high performance. So
Yes.
I think there's both aspects in both.
Yeah, that's true. The Paralympics have a motivational component to it. I guess the distinction that is maybe more important to make is that to get to the Paralympics takes the same kind of worldwide competition and rising up the levels and making a very elite team to get to the Paralympics in a way that really is different from Special Olympics. But the main thing that I want to get across is that difference in the way the world sees the Special Olympics as this inspirational event, and the Paralympics is the second largest athletic event on the planet. It happens on the same site as the Olympic Games every 2 years as a matter of contract, and their interest is the sport, and that's really what comes across. Okay. So what got me into that? Totally went on another tangent. Okay. I know there was some point in there. I want to mention something about a couple of more delicate topics, but I'll take the question first. Thank you.
I was just wondering if you ever
No, I have never been in the Paralympics. I was a journalist at the Paralympics in Australia, so I got a real first-hand view of it, which is why I'm all the more convinced of, they think of themselves as athletes first, and that when you go and you see them, the disability goes away. The Australians went nuts over the Paralympic Games. It was covered on television. It was on the front page of the newspapers. They were totally with it, totally got it. And they showed up in droves. It was huge. It was amazing. But when the Paralympic Games happened here in Atlanta, in Salt Lake City, who knew, right? It's, again, viewed as that inspirational thing rather than, wow, a great sporting event. Yes?
And Paralympics ever promoted? Because I don't think I've heard.
Well, the media in the United States does not give the Paralympic Games any attention. That's just the way it is. Yes?
Do you know the recent Paralympics just came up in China?
Say it again?
Well, the Olympics just happened in China.
Yeah.
They just had the Paralympics. I was reading
Yes, they
about
did.
that. Did they support that? Were the Chinese very supportive? Was it a big deal?
I'm not quite sure how visible, but I do know that whenever the Olympics happen and the Paralympics follows, that the host countries improve the overall accessibility of their country. It is now possible for me to visit the Acropolis in Athens thanks to their making it accessible for the Paralympic Games. And that kind of stuff happened in China as well. So it tends to raise awareness in the country, at least that. But how much they actually covered it as a sporting event, I'm not so sure. And Murderball, has anybody ever seen the movie Murderball? Okay. This is a story about athletes who play a game called quad rugby. And this really is a take no prisoners intense game played only by people with quadriplegia, which means that they have an impact on their spinal cord at a level that is in the cervical spine, so at the least their fingers are affected or more. Okay? Quadriplegia, 4 limbs. And sexuality is absolutely an aspect of what these guys talk about. They talk about their sex lives. You see them dealing with women. So it's, in terms of this sexuality discussion, and just the general disability discussion, and the athletic discussion, Murderball is strongly recommended for you. Yes?
I'm curious, it doesn't have anything to do with Olympics or anything, but I'm curious about whether you could offer maybe what has been your most profound lesson that you probably may not have learned about life, maybe in general, had you not had your experience where living with your wheelchair. I'm just wondering if there's anything you could maybe offer that you probably in general, and it could be related to sexuality, maybe not, but it's just
What have I learned from my disability that I would not have otherwise? Right?
about your disability or even life in general. It doesn't even have to be.
Yeah. Well, through the experience of my disability, what kind of lessons have I gotten that I wouldn't have gotten if I wasn't paralyzed? Which is, an interesting question that obviously I considered, but it's, on one level, there's no way to know, because who knows where my life would have gone. And I can't even guess at that. And I like the idea. It's a very appealing notion that, I've gained some things from my disability that I wouldn't have gained otherwise, because I want to find ways to appreciate it. I want to have the feeling that I've gained from it at the same time as I've lost some things from it. And that's probably true, but without the actual comparison, I can't know. But the thing that I do think is true, that all of us find, is that this quality of self-acceptance that we get faced with, because we don't fit some standard of normal, because we live in a world that applies a filter to us that we know doesn't fit our actual experience. People are always trying to help me. People are having that, I'm so sorry for you. Or, oh, wow, you're so amazing and heroic. We live in a world that sees us not for who we are, that applies all this stuff to us. And when that's the way the world responds to you, typically, that sets up something in you where you have to start to think about, okay, well, who am I really? And how much am I going to care about what other people think, or the way other people see me, or what other people think my life is about? And is it about everybody else, or is it about me and what I know about who I am, and what I believe, and what I can do, and how I feel, and so on and so forth? Disability amplifies that. And I really think that a lot of us have learned levels of self-acceptance because we got pushed into it, in a more accelerated way, in certain ways because of our disability. It's no guarantee, but I think that you'll find that a lot of people with disabilities will tell you that that's something that we gain from it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, can we talk about kinky sex now?
Kinky sex, please.
Okay, you can leave the room. You're going to miss the best part now. Okay. First, let me start with the notion of devotees. There are people in the world who are stimulated by people with disabilities. And this doesn't sound healthy.
Can I make a comment about that? I mean, I'm interrupting you. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, myself, I definitely find the extreme where the men are very drawn to me because, one, hopefully they think I'm attractive, and typically that's the first, but then also because of my disability, and their question always is, so how does that work? I'm so intrigued. I want to know, how can you have sex? How can I get that accomplished and get that done? Right? And
Yeah, men like a challenge.
right, exactly. Right, so it's anywhere from the sexual extreme to, even being objectified and completely dominated over.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe the other extreme is completely like, wow, I think you're hot, but you're in a wheelchair, so forget it, right?
Right.
And so it's pretty.
Yeah, so because of who you are and the nature of your power wheelchair user, and you're attractive and you're young and you're verbal, that you get to see levels of things that other women don't get to see, right? But this devotee issue is, and you touched on this, about dominating, about the issue is not whether or not somebody is attracted to somebody because of their disability. The issue is whether or not they're allowing you to be who you are, or whether they're trying to cast you into a certain mold where, you're the one that I'm going to be able to dominate because you're, more passive because you have a disability, and that's what attracts me. And well, no, that's called unhealthy relationship, right? That's called wrong person. Whereas I know other people with disabilities who are with somebody who's attracted to some aspect of their disability, and they talk about it, and it's totally out in the open, and they're, having a real relationship relationship and their intimacy is authentic and their friendship and their relationship is authentic, and the person with disability saying, well, they're attracted to my disability. What's the problem here? You know, some people are attracted to eyes or butts or breasts or whatever, and so why not that? You know, it raises a really interesting question. But the line is really about honesty and respect and acceptance and not imposing something on somebody. So, you know, being a devotee often is an unhealthy thing, but it doesn't have to be. You really have to take it on its face. Okay? But then it raises the issue of what about other kinds of options? So remember earlier I was talking about, well, because I've lost what I've lost, I want to find all possible options now. I want to find everything that's out there for me to do. So what if that starts getting into some ranges of things that are maybe a little taboo in society, that some people consider to be unhealthy? What if you want to explore dominance and submission, role-playing? What if you want to, you know, explore bondage or maybe levels of pain? And, you know, this stuff is out there, right? It's far more prevalent in society than society wants to believe. It is out there. And, again, just from having done research, and knowing some people who actually, this is a philosophy they believe in, it's not about being dangerous. In fact, it's exactly about consensual activities between people that are safe. Safe, sane, and consensual is what they talk about. And that nobody's being forced into anything that they don't want to be doing, and nobody is endangered by what's going on. But in fact, people are engaging by agreement in something that they're curious about and that they find stimulating and that they're willing to trust each other with. You know, this is the way these people talk about it. To allow someone to tie you up is an amazing act of trust, that they're going to let you go and that they're not going to abuse you, and that you get to say where the line is and this stops now if it's not enjoyable for you anymore. That's how people explore this stuff in a way that's responsible. So my point around disability is exactly because people have lost whatever they've lost, they have a right to whatever they want to pursue in the privacy of their kitchens. Right? And nobody should have the right to tell them they can't do it just so it meets this standard of trust and safety and agreement and so on and so forth. It's about being creative. It's about exploring what's erotic and what's enjoyable and what's fun. And you know, there are people who are involved in this kind of stuff where they say that it deepens their trust for each other. So again, you got to think about all this stuff. You got to learn about what it really means, and you have to find where the actual boundaries are for what's appropriate and what isn't, for what's harmful and what isn't. And that when we open up and when we trust, and we don't want to be damaged emotionally by somebody, that's what counts more than anything else. And if it meets that test, then hey, go have fun. We're all entitled to it, and especially someone with a disability, exactly because they deserve all the options that they can possibly find because we have lost whatever we've lost. That make sense? Gee, I can't end on that. Any more questions?
I've got one sort of unrelated to sexuality, but it could be, because I don't know the answer.
Okay, well, I'll find a way to make it.
How does all of this relate to this sort of war injuries that we're seeing more and more of because of our present situation? And is there an effort being made to see where the differences lie? Because I would assume there must be, first of all, they may not be spinal injuries, they're amputees and all that.
Yes.
But is there any, are things going on that are kind of hopefully going to work together to have the two groups kind of meet and help each other?
Yeah. So the question is about what is being done to address veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan in terms of, well, there's a whole array of things, you know, and I've done some work with the VA system, and they are, you know, hustling all they can to be in a position to deal with the kinds of injuries that are coming back. By the way, there are far fewer spinal cord injuries happening now because they have the body armor. So it's amputation and brain injury, which is much more the disabilities that are coming back, and far fewer spinal cord injuries than in the past, whereas in the Vietnam era, there's lots of it. But, you know, I was injured in '73, so there was a period of years there where the first assumption was always that, oh, you were in Vietnam. But no, I was just young enough, thank God, to not have gone. Okay? this is an issue about the nature of how one adjusts depending on the way their disability was acquired. And when somebody acquires an injury violently, there's a different set of processes for that.
That's kind of what I was kind of
Yeah.
trauma if it changes.
Violently acquired disability is actually a very specific category of study and treatment. So, but you know, to have been shot by a mugger or an enraged family member or whatever, that has qualities of blame and victimization, and so there's a very different kinds of psychological issues that have to be dealt with for people to move through that. And then there are violently acquired situations that people might have gotten themselves into themselves, and then they have a sense of self-blame for it, and they have to be dealing with that. I think in military situations, it's a little different. They have this real quality of honor that they really believe in, that they are there for a purpose, that they are there in order to protect principles that they believe in, democracy, freedom, America, so on and so forth. And depending on how it actually happened, of course. But I think that many of those soldiers are coming back not necessarily with that kind of violent resentment quality, but maybe even with some quality of pride, you know, that it happened. It all depends on the context of how it happened, right? And of how well they get treated for their disability. So a lot of these guys coming back with PTSD and they're not getting good counseling, that's where the resentment comes from, not from the disability that they're experiencing, but the fact that they didn't get well supported for it. That's the difference. And so the better we do, see, we're back to politics and policy again, that the better our system meets people's needs, then that's when people can make their optimal adjustments and get to the most of what's possible for them, and including relationships. Marriages, relationships, potential for people to achieve intimacy in their lives is impacted by the system as much as it is by the objective realities of whatever the disability is. So it does end up costing people into but a partner with a disability is still held to this test, even unconsciously, right? We may not realize we're doing it, but a woman who is considering a man with a disability, she, despite herself, aware of it or not, is coming from that, is he going to be able to take care of me? Is he going to be my protector? Is he going to go kill the mastodon for me, right? This stuff is still wired in us. And a man considering a woman with a disability is like, oh, is she going to be the nurturer? Is she going to be able to, cook the food and raise the babies and take care of the house? And like, oh my God, and not in this era. We don't want to see women that way, but it's still built into us. And we just need to make these things conscious to understand that maybe that's part of our resistance to that partner with a disability. And gee, in these days, that stuff doesn't really matter the way it used to anymore. So it's about bringing our very evolutionary circuitry into consciousness. And that is the process. Oh boy, I'm really going to get idealistic now. We are all on a continuum of becoming more enlightened. We are still in the adolescence of being human beings. We are learning what it really means to be human. And what we are starting to find out is that we don't have to live by a lot of social rules. We can discover what values and what reality is for ourselves. And we can let go of being cast into these roles and find out that everybody deserves to be seen for who they are, that we have deep power and amazing human capacity in us, and that we can all believe in that as a society, and that we can be loving with each other, and that whether or not we can stand or walk or grip or do math, is nearly irrelevant to the things that really matter for the roles that we play in the world, in our community, in the workplace, and in intimate relationships. And this is the process that we're all in, that we're all learning about, and I believe, really, sincerely, that people with disabilities are fostering this. That the more we come out in the world, the more we talk about the stuff that we've been talking about tonight, the more we model and make it really clear, wow, look at all the people out in the world with disabilities who are having relationships, and look at their partners talking about how great they are in bed. Wow, what does that tell us about us as human beings? Everybody gets elevated by this. And it's just part of this historical process that we're all in of coming into our own as human beings, where we're going to learn not to make war and everything else. It's all part of the same thing. So I really do see this disability issue in this larger context. And then when we talk about this, it's not just about, oh, how nice the person with a disability can, has developed a taste for cunnilingus. It's about these larger things and what that really means. Sorry, I had to slip that in. So I guess that's my big inspirational finish. And I hope that I've given you some insight and some sense of yourself. Because people do tell me that I'm inspirational, and it's kind of my job to be an inspirational speaker. But what I hear a lot is, oh, Gary, you're so inspirational, but I can never do what you do. I've inspired you to believe you can't do something? See how this doesn't quite work for me? Anything else I can convince you is impossible in your life? So people project, understandably, that they wouldn't be able to do it. But every one of us that has gone through this experience has found out that we can, once we figured out how it works, and once we discovered this innate human capacity to adjust. That's just the way it works. And so I want to be an inspiration, but only if you come away being willing to believe that your limits are a little farther out than maybe you thought. And that if, God forbid, you should acquire a disability in your lifetime, because it can happen to anybody, happen to me in a moment, right? That you'll understand that it's loss, and that there's grief, and it's not fun, and it's a drag, and there's a lot about it that you wouldn't choose, but when you're inside it, that you have the ability to grasp your life and to move on in ways that you just wouldn't assume when you're thinking about, I don't want it. But when it becomes your reality, everything changes from the inside. You choose life. That's what people do. We're built for that, and that's how it works. And that's what you should assume about anyone with a disability that you encounter. That's what you should assume about where anyone with a disability can get to, and your believing that is going to allow you to partner with them for them to find it for themselves, and especially if you're in a professional relationship with somebody, you must believe that in order to be effective as a partner with that person, because that's how you're going to empower them. So keep exploring this. Explore your own feelings about your own fears, your own natural, understandable discomfort about what if it happened to you. Of course you don't want it to happen to you, but know that when it actually does happen to somebody, the picture is completely different, and they're going to get to places that they couldn't imagine, and you get to be a part of that if you're a clinical professional. Because the therapists that I work with and that I meet as I travel around, they love this work. They all have a story about going to a party and they meet somebody and they say, oh, I work in rehab with people with spinal cord injuries. And the response is, oh, gosh, how do you spend every day working around people who are traumatized, whose lives have been trashed like that? And they go, no, I work with people who are emerging. I work with people who are finding new visions for themselves, and I get to be part of that. And I see them, transcending stuff and learning things about themselves that they never would have believed. And they love the work. It's the most satisfying thing in the world. It's not about the trauma. It's about the reemergence of the person and how much satisfaction they get from being a part of them. Right? And some of them have sex with them. But some of them, remember I said earlier, they actually do meet each other. Actually, I met a couple yesterday where the woman was quadriplegic, used a power wheelchair, and her husband worked in the rehab institute where she did her rehab, and and that's where they met, and now they're married. Right? So yeah, sex happens anywhere. Whew. Yes.
Did you meet your wife?
How did I meet my wife? I met my wife through a mutual friend. He's my best friend, and he still is. And she's a psychotherapist, and they were going through the licensing study process together, and so that's how they became friends. And he thought that we had some things in common, and that we should just meet each other. He wasn't, he swears he wasn't trying to fix us up. And so, yeah, we just met through a mutual friend. And she always talks about when she met me that there was something like, hello, here he is. And it wasn't about, oh, wow, what an interesting guy with a disability. She swears that that's not what she saw. It wasn't about that. Yeah. You want to know any more? We have 2 Labrador retrievers. She doesn't juggle, but I'm living with it. Just has to be okay. She doesn't play backgammon. It's okay.
How is Sandra Fell in terms of overall accessibility?
How is Sandra Fell in terms of overall accessibility? Sandra Fell is great in terms of overall accessibility. There are some spots over like in the Canal District where, the curb isn't cut or there's a fire hydrant and the sidewalk isn't wide enough. So they're still filling in some spots. But on the whole, it's pretty good. And again, I have this perspective from 1973. Man, we've come a long way. Things are like way better than they used to be. So from my perspective, I'm not going to complain too much about, the occasional thing that I encounter. Actually, my problems are much more about travel. And this is really a good thing because now I can drive, I can fly, I can ride buses, I can get in the doors, I can work, I can go really anywhere. But a few weeks ago, I found myself in Houston at 1:30 in the morning without a hotel room because they put me in a room that wasn't accessible because they didn't know what they were doing, and it was the only thing they had. And then last week, I found myself in Houston at midnight in a rental car where the hand control had disengaged from the accelerator, and I was stranded in the middle of the night in Houston. So this is the kind of stuff that's happening now. But the fact that those are the things that's happening is a good thing. It means I'm at the point where, great, I'm out there in the world and I'm bumping into stuff that I never would have gotten that far 20, 30, 50 years ago. Right? So, I see it all as progress. You just got to keep doing the work. Yeah. Well, I think that time is up. And some of you are still here. Thank you for sticking around.